All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming to the Legal and Policy Dev Room.
Look at all the hardcore fans that are stayed in the audience, because we filled up.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. The Vance Talk was the only thing we were full for today. I actually had to flip the sign to the full setting, but we're not full now. I think that's obvious. But we are so thankful for those of you that stayed just to hear us at the final session.
So I think we did a lot of new things, or one major new thing this year. And so if it's okay by everybody, I think we should start out with feedback on that. So debates, did you like them? Did you know? Let's start with hands. So raise your hand if you really liked them.
50%.
It's like 3/4. Okay, well, it'd be easier to do this. Raise your hand if you really hated them. Okay, so 2 people really hated them.
You didn't even have to do
raise your hand
any,
if you're
Fontana.
not sure whether you like. Raise your hand if you're not sure if you like them or not.
I'm revising my answer.
Okay, then if you're not, for people who are not sure, it's about 1/4. And then raise your hand if you really liked some, but you really disliked others. Okay. So I think in full disclosure, this was a real experiment, so we didn't know exactly how to organize them. I think we learned a lot. And we could see what works.
I spent the entire day yesterday studying debate theory.
So I think with the assertion that the vast majority of the people in the room really liked them a lot, or really liked some of them, maybe we could go to the negative and have people give constructive feedback on what they would do.
Sure. And why don't we
differently.
trade mics and I'll let people ask questions. Is that what you're asking for now?
Yeah, that sounds great. Then I don't have to run around with the
Okay,
the
I
microphone.
see a raised hand.
And I have something that, a comment that was made on social media that I can read as well. That was in the negative, so.
I like the format, but there were possibly too many of them. So it sort of got a little repetitive because the format was the same again and again and again. So, yeah, I wouldn't run as many again, but I'd definitely do them again.
I feel like this sort of scratched an itch for a lot of people, because a lot of people want to debate after a talk often, and so this kind of solved that in a part. But I think, yeah, probably went a bit too much in the other direction. So a mix of a few debates and a few talks and kind of on different subjects, that would be great. But I love the concept of some debate happening here and not like in the hallway.
Cool.
Okay, you, Hugh, then Kate.
So I think the debates were very entertaining, but there was, I think there's kind of a problem that since the folks who participated are more on one side of the debate actually, then when there's a need to represent the other side, it sort of becomes a caricature. So it would be maybe useful to have actual proponents of the other side participate, although it's kind of also a problem to sort of invite them to the lion's den to be like...
Yeah, we really appreciate that. To be very frank about it, there was a tremendous amount of effort done primarily by Tom. I actually want to take a moment to ask, will somebody else mic run for us for this session so Tom can be up here with us? Okay,
Yeah,
he said it.
I'm just going to echo his
But give me a second, Kate. I'll finish that other point. So yeah, we spent a tremendous amount of effort emailing people, begging them to be in the debates, begging them to be on various sides. We reached out to people who were on various sides, and we had a hard time filling some of them on certain sides.
Just a quick question. Raise your hand if you didn't participate in a debate, but you totally would in the future. So like 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. Okay. 9.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the prior point. It would have been better if there was something more sincerely debating each side, as opposed to people putting on a persona and then putting these big disclaimers up. We'll probably learn more.
I want to read the negative feedback that we got on social media, just because I think it dovetails with it, which is dislike new debate format of the Legal and Policy Room at FOSDEM. Informative sessions with respect to less sensational things going on in legal and policy, and FOSS replaced with rehashed conversations we've been having for months for entertainment. Glad my legal team isn't here, would waste their time.
So can I say something? So I don't agree with that comment, but I do think that I felt that there was too much, this was good entertainment, but what I originally loved about this dev room was the more serious discussion of legal and policy issues. And this was, as someone said, it kind of at times verged on caricature. And I see how it's sort of fun, but to me, I'll just state some other problems I had. I thought that I think the format is somewhat exclusionary because I think only certain types of personalities are going to be likely to enjoy doing this kind of thing and be good at it. And so I think it's kind of much more exclusionary than general presentations are, which are exclusionary enough already. And I think that's something that should be borne in mind.
And one of the reasons we did this is because we looked at the last few years of the dev room talks, and we get rehashed, recycled submissions of the same thing every single year from the usual suspects, and we do a lot of effort to get the CFP to new places, and the CFP has like way too much text because I wrote it, like paragraphs saying like, we want people who haven't talked about policy before, please submit, et cetera, but we haven't been getting that the last few years. And so we didn't want to just run the usual suspects giving all the same talks for yet another year, and that's why we did it this way. That's true. But I wrote I did not write that alone, but I wrote the too verbose stuff. That's what I did.
One point, I think a lot of the participants were what we would call usual suspects. That's one of the problems. So I'm glad that there are some people who are willing to maybe do debates in future years. So if we get additional people to do it who haven't spoken in the dev room before, I think that'd be great. But I think that there were a lot of, speakers that we really like, but they're, as Bradley would say, usual suspects.
Yeah, I think that it's being a first-year proposition that might happen, but go ahead, Pam.
Yeah, so I was going to say, and I'm saying this with my open source initiative board member hat on, that as we shared privately, and I'll say publicly, that it was very difficult. It was very difficult for the OSI to sort of see our mission sort of up for vote. First off, with a very clickbaity title that was negative towards us, and then as first conveyed to us that there was going to be sort of a vote on whether or not the open source definition is appropriate or not, which I just can't tell you how much angst that created at the OSI. So it's maybe less clickbait. I appreciate that you didn't ask those questions. I appreciate very much that and I did like the questions you did ask. Was did you learn something? I think those were appropriate, but less clickbaity titles or sort of hanging people out to dry less on the titles we would have appreciated that.
Yeah, so what we had this year was like a mix of we did the general call like CFP for folks that would want to submit the debates, and then we also created some of them, and I think we would have a heavier hand in constructing those in the future, and for many reasons, including that.
So just actually building on Kate's comment from before, that it's maybe preferable to have people who are actually not just taking an opinion for the sake of having a debate, but actually hold that opinion as well. I think the advantage of having it this way and actually putting or forcing people to take a specific position makes the debate less heated, because sometimes it feels like if you have someone on the panel who's actually holding a very controversial opinion, they will get attacked, and it will really go into that, and you lose focus of the topic as such. So yes, I understand this is kind of it turns into a caricature, maybe, but it also has the advantage of allowing a debate about it.
What if the topics were more subtle?
Yes, I would have preferred that as well. For some of them, I think I would have preferred them to be clearer on what you're actually talking about and what the debate is going to be about. But
yeah, they can be narrower.
That's not a format issue. That's more of a phrasing issue.
Yeah, we actually originally wanted to structure it going even further in a very traditional way that they do debates where you don't know what side you have to take. It's a coin flip, which is how debate tournaments usually run. You're given a policy issue and you're told what the policy issue is ahead, but not which side you have to take. And then a coin is flipped at the beginning, and that's how you end up on either side. Basically, we couldn't get anybody to agree to that who was willing to debate. So.
If people could pass the mic around, and Tom, you could come up, because I feel like, so you can keep the mic where it is and we'll pass it around, but Tom, you're not participating in the,
This is, yeah.
so you can keep that.
I'll hand it right back. So this kind of relates to what Miriam was saying and probably also outs me as being my first time in the legal dev room. What I was thinking about was there seems to be too much of an assumption of a base level of knowledge in two different ways. One is I had no idea what people were debating about at times because the debate topic wasn't clearly well defined, and then I would click on the description and the page and I'm like, this doesn't sound right. It sounds like people were actually talking about two different things. But something else is that the people in the audience, I got this impression earlier when somebody said, what are the 4 freedoms, for example, and I'm lucky that I know some of this stuff, but being somebody who has been out of the open source movement for a long time and coming back, I'm like, ooh, I actually haven't thought about a lot of this stuff for a long time, and all of this really assumes a very high level of knowledge, and it prevents a lot of audience members, I think. I'm going to speak for a lot of other people, I'm assuming. It prevents us from being able to engage, really, because I have no idea what you're talking about sometimes.
I think it's a really fair criticism. We have kind of maybe enjoyed a lot of success in the dev room and by having a lot of legal geeks and policy people involved that, really go deep on this. But what we missed, I think, and very much to your point, is that we kind of especially today, I can tell from not just your question, but many questions that we have made a whole bunch of assumptions about a lot of things, not just how copyright law in particular works, but also some of the decisions that have been happening that are influential and kind of how it will affect us. And some of us, think about this a lot, and some of us don't, but and I think it's sort of like having an open source project that's newbie friendly, where we have starter bugs and we have a way of getting involved. We need to have a better on-ramps to this and not just assume that everything is easy.
Yeah, and another thing that I've noticed happening, and it really didn't become clear to me until today, or maybe yesterday when I was talking to some people. We in this dev room are kind of a victim of our own success in certain types of ways. Historically, we were the first dev room to not be about software development, which we're very proud of. This was, Tom's idea basically was like, hey, we could have a dev room about this stuff, and it's never been done before. We're excited, and now there are more than just us. We're not the only dev room now. One of the reasons we always give up we don't try to do 2 days anymore is because Community Dev Room has a lot of the talks now that we would usually have to do here because they weren't welcome in any other dev room. And I get the impression, and actually I've heard this from speakers and potential speakers, that there's like a career need to speak in this dev room. Like people need to speak in this dev room for their own career development. I mean, I was surprised by this. And a little bit, I think I'm probably all flattered as organizers that it's so important to be in this dev room speaking, but on the other hand, it kind of changes the nature to a certain extent. But
I don't know if that's really true.
Okay.
I know that definitely we know of a person who believes that to be the case.
I don't think it's true. I think you can have a very successful career without ever speaking in this. Yeah, so from the very beginning, we conceived of this dev room as being an advanced one, and that was because 8-9 years ago, there were conferences, free software, open source software conferences that had legal presentations, and they tended to be very kind of introductory. And we thought, well, there's already conferences, like commercially kind of conferences around open source and free software, not really free software, open source, that are doing very introductory level legal stuff. Why don't we be the one that talks about things at a more advanced level? And we're not the only one now that does that, although we may be the only one that's kind of really open to the public, which is something.
One challenge I faced with some of the debates was remembering what role people were supposed to have, because I knew a few of them and you'd asked them to play a different role to normal. I don't know whether we could have had hats or personas up or color coding to help us, and maybe also them remember which position they were trying to take in that debate.
I thought about, creating a web app or something that would show you where you were in the process and, what position people were taking, and, the dog ate my homework.
You could even just have one slide on the screen with pictures of the participants that lists which sides they're on. That probably would help a lot. Or have them with two sides of the screen. Yeah.
I'll just, so we can remember. You can keep talking.
More questions?
Okay, is there another question?
Thank you, first. It's really cool to see us experimenting with the dev room. I think this is my 4th or 5th time here, and this was definitely way different than the experience I've had other times. So I like that we're trying to iterate and improve and give new voices and give other people a chance to experiment with these positions. I think first, I like it. I think we could do a little bit less of it. That would be like my first one, would be like have a few more traditional talks mixed with it. But putting my advocacy hat on, we're in the midst of like a very FUD-ridden cycle right now, and there's a lot of misinformation going around, and I actually felt more confused about the issues by the end of it, because it was, I don't know, and I'm like I would consider myself a sophisticated, person who studies these things, and there were moments when I forgot like whether or not the speaker was, there was a lot of context switching, so maybe like sticking to the guns a little more would be helpful. And it would be, it's hard for me to imagine like a brand new person to the dev room, but again, like this is an advanced dev room in the assumption. So I am thankful that we do it. I think it would be cool to do a more of a balance of traditional in the mix and have the roles better delegated too. And just, I don't want to be the guy that says we shouldn't have fun in here. Like it was cool to see everybody laughing. We need to laugh, and we need to have some joy in the dark times too. So thank you for bringing a little bit of levity to these times too.
I also want to, we can continue to talk about the debates, but I also want to just make a shout out to our 2 collaboration sessions. I had the idea that, because there are a lot of really smart people in this room, that we could brainstorm ways of addressing some issues, and I'm really glad that Atello and Nate came to talk about that. I apologize that, the timing is short. 25 minutes is really short to address these things, and I really applaud them for introducing these issues and Nate proactively setting up a link for people to continue the discussion afterwards. So just a question on that. Do people think that the idea of doing a collaboration session was a good idea? Okay, let me ask a different question. Well,
Discussion session.
yeah, they were the idea was for them to be more discussion sessions, to put forth a problem statement of something that was happening in our community, and maybe really just have an interactive session about how to address it. And if I guess instead of asking a question, I'll just maybe pass the mic around and have people share their thoughts about that, what that we could do differently, what you liked, what you didn't like, that sort of thing. So.
And Kevin, you can say whatever it was that you were going to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a last comment on the debate topic. This is mostly for Bradley, because he just said he did all this research. When these kinds of debates are held, what is the expectation for the audience knowledge level? That might be an issue here, is if people didn't already have the background knowledge of the topic that was being discussed, then you just jumped right into the debate. Mm-hmm. Maybe you need 2 minutes from an introduction to just say, this is a current topic of discussion, here are some situations that are going to be debated, or something like that.
So I think there might be something wrong with the mic because it sounds like you're not mic'd. So I just wanted to make sure. I heard the question. I'm going to repeat it just in case. So the question was like, why, like, how is this normally handled in other places that have debates? The thing is debate structure we're using is used for debate tournaments. Where, to be quite frank about it, it looks like, from my research, again, I just did a crash course like on this myself. I'm not an expert at all. John Sullivan, who I don't think is in the room, actually did both high school and college, and at graduate level, he did judging at these debate tournaments. So he knows a lot about it. But I was talking to him about it at lunch as well, and it was, the policy position is almost moot, right? You're graded and you're judged on how well you construct your argument. And that's who wins, is not necessarily who the right side. And so I don't know if that format is right for us because we're not trying to do that, but that's the format that is typically used for formal debates.
What if instead what we do if we do it again, and there are a lot of ifs contained in that, but if we do it again, what if we have a presentation on a certain topic and follow with a debate related to that presentation? Raise your hand if you think that would be a good idea. Okay.
So, understand without the mic again, you think it's important, but you may also have situations where in tournaments, the members of the audience are not going to have strongly held personal opinions about the thing being debated. In this room, almost everyone will. So,
so on the collab sessions, I think that anything that we bring up that is going to be meaningfully advanced within 25 or 40 or 50 minutes is going to be too simple for this group, and anything else is not going to be meaningfully advanced within that time frame. I think that the collab sessions would be better used in other ways.
Okay, fair.
Karen, were you thinking like a fishbowl type format when you were asking about?
Well, you're getting close to it, not necessarily fishbowl directly, but more of sort of an unconference thing. So, yeah.
So I mean, I guess that's one idea. The other idea, going Van at what you were saying, is, I mean, honestly, you remember the open source think tanks where we would go and you could spend a couple hours, break up into groups, work on some problems, and then everybody comes back and presents stuff. That would be another format, which is a huge deviation from anything we've ever done here, but which people might be interested in if we have problem statements that are of the right magnitude.
I think, Jim, you're kind of agreeing with Van that it needs more time.
Okay. Raise your hand if you have burning feedback on today that you absolutely really want to give us, because I also want to give us a second if anyone wants us to address any topics of the day, which this has traditionally been the purpose of the panel, and I'm cognizant that some people may have stayed for that. I don't know. But we want to hear important feedback if folks feel like there are points that haven't been shared. But we're also very happy to get feedback by email or in more public places too, with whatever you feel comfortable with.
Thank you.
Aww. Because we have 20 minutes left.
All right.
So we have 20 minutes left, and I turned to Richard Fontana because I think he's a good person to decide what things we might talk about for the remaining 20 minutes of this panel.
Oh, I don't know why you think that. I mean, there's so much that we could talk about, so many exciting issues. Well, not so difficult.
Ask.
Yeah, we can ask questions. Pam Shustak.
Here. Wait. I have no exercise today. This is great.
If you all moved in closer.
No, it's way too much trouble to move. As four highly experienced people involved in open source for many years, I'm curious what your perspective is on two things in particular, the ethical licenses and commercial open source, and whether you see this as something that is very different and groundbreaking, or whether this is same old, we've been here before.
Oh, I guess I can start. So it's not new. Neither thing is new. We've had ethical licenses that are sort of aimed at kind of ethical or social policy problems that kind of are, that look a little bit like free software, like what we've thought of as free software or open source licenses. The debates over those have happened at various times in the past. I think what's different now, to me, is it just feels like a louder kind of thing. Like there's more, and I think it's less marginal. So it's less marginalized. So it's being treated seriously by people who I wouldn't see as being on the fringes, but rather are kind of like very much within the central part of what I think of as the kind of FOSS community. And as for the commercial open source, I mean, that doesn't seem new either. What kind of annoys me, and I think I actually got this maybe originally from Josh, something that I heard Josh say once, is that the people who are advocating for what's called, what I think you mean by commercial open source, are kind of trying to piggyback on the ethical source people, sort of trying to appropriate their their political viewpoint for basically making a kind of business argument or a business model kind of argument. So that's very disturbing.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not your lawyer, and this is not legal advice. But I don't think a license is the right place to try and promote ethics. I think that a license, software license needs to be as simple as possible and no simpler, really. I think that what makes open source great is the ability for us to collaborate without having to ask permission. And well, many of these ethical aims are completely laudable. I think that the potential for proliferation of ethical licenses will only cause problems for us. And that was one thing that I learned, or really stood out in my mind from the debates today, is that we could have a variety of ethical licenses, and then there will all be incompatible with each other, and our compatibility will be excruciatingly painful. So I don't think that works. I don't think it's the right way to do it. And I'm going to ask Pam to clarify, what did you mean by commercial open source? Because I don't understand the question.
Yeah, like Government Commons Clause, that kind of thing, I think, right? Yeah.
The companies that complain about strip mining.
Strip mining.
Yeah, okay, well, yeah, so I think, the shorthand version of Commons Clause in particular is that if you sprinkle that in your open source license, it's no longer open source. I think that the idea of restricting licenses use for, well, I think, let's be honest, to discriminate against cloud providers or software as a service providers is defeating Freedom Zero, which is the freedom to run the program. I think that it's really not, it's a goal that's not really an open source goal. It's more of a business goal. And if you really want to have a license like that, that's completely fine. And you can have a proprietary license. Just please don't try to call it open source or try to come to me and redefine what the word open source should mean.
Right. I think we need public processes around it. I mean, I think this is one of the things that I really like about licenses that have been drafted in a community process. It's one of the things I like, actually. I really like about the OSI license review process is that that's done in a public way with input. I think that I think that having more drafting processes that are groups. I mean, for my view on the ethical licensing, and I'm leading a discussion on Monday at Copyleft Conf. Little plug in case you don't know about it. It's a one-day conference on Monday, copyleftconf.org, and my view on it, which I'll be more coy about there because I'm more leading a discussion, is that I think it reflects our utter failure as a movement to be leaders in for ethical technology. Like, I think that we identified that there is something special about software freedom, that there's something special about the ethics of technology. And we got on board early, right? We were like some of the first people to start talking about it. And then you start seeing TV shows like Silicon Valley spoofing companies using our rhetoric. And so much of that is that we failed to really draw a clear line, and we failed to lead. And there's this idea that while there are all these problems, and we have the sense that licensing may be able to take care of some of that, and so why can't we use this and embrace it and go to the next level? And I think that we as a software freedom community, both the existing old guard and everyone new who's expressing an interest now, can come together and take the best ideas of some of these things and start thinking from scratch, and not throwing away anything that we have before, certainly. But you know, seeing if any of those ideas are good for any other initiatives that aren't necessarily licensing.
Yeah, to the first part of your question, Pam, which was, is this new? I agree with Fontana. It is so unnew that it's ridiculously old. The first time I saw a modification of GPL to say not for military use, I think was 1996, but it was no later than 1998 of people trying to do that. And the first time I saw, you know, basically non-commercial use only source available licenses was when I was an undergraduate in like 92, 93. It was very common in academic communities. They would put software out non-commercial use only and hope to get some sort of contractual funding for the commercial use. So those things have been around for a while. I think the difference now is really a failure, like Karen was saying, a failure of leadership, but I have a slightly different way of looking at it. I think the community that understood why clear licensing was important and definitions of what licensors should do was important, was not very connected with a generation of software developers that kind of came up in the late 2000s. And I mean, I think, how many people in the room would consider themselves primarily a JavaScript developer? There's actually 2 in the room. I was expecting to get 3. I was expecting to get 0. Because we never connected with that community in the way that we should have as like free software activists. And there's a ton of different things that went wrong because of that, because we didn't take them seriously, and that was our fault. And that was another way the leadership was bad historically in FOSS.
Hi. I think there. Oh, go ahead.
So one question related here is that the ethical licenses seem to be following a code of conduct kind of behavior, trying to enforce a code of conduct for the corporate user community or provider community, if you want it, while trying to defend against abusive, for some reason, behavior by these corporations against others or in the community or as isolationists. So how have we been able to enforce our codes of conduct in user communities in the past?
Well, so project codes of conduct haven't been, as I understand them, haven't been targeted against participation outside of a project itself. So there's been this assumption that you can, if you're a copyright owner, you can police behavior that falls outside the scope of the license. But codes of conduct are things that only apply to activity within a project or activity at a project's event, for example, at a conference like this one. So I think that maybe that kind of distinction may frustrate some people who, you know, they see I would say the success of the adoption of codes of conduct by projects, but they see a gap between, you know, what those cover and the way the software is being used in a much larger sphere outside of the project itself. So I'm pretty sympathetic actually to a lot of the people who are talking about, you know, ethical licenses. I agree with what others have said that you know, I don't feel that licenses are a good mechanism. I don't currently believe that that these kinds of licenses should be considered free software licenses. But I think that I have a lot of sympathy, and I feel that I don't know what others here think, but as I said before, I think that what's different now is that this is not a fringe thing. This is like, there are people who are speaking out about this issue who are really at the very center of this movement.
Cool. This question is for you, Karen, because you sort of mentioned. Better? Yes. Cool. You sort of mentioned the ethical core of the free software movement that got a lot of people interested, and how it feels like maybe in some ways it's failed or it's moved away from that. And this is a big issue that we are seeing in the software industry. I'd like to hear more about, do you feel like this issue still sits within the free software community and the organizations advocating for it? And if so, what sort of role do you envision these organizations playing?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because saying this issue is tough. There are so many issues that are being raised, and I don't know, but the intersection between our software and our lives is the critical part of where we operate. And and you asked me, so I assume it's in part because I work at Software Freedom Conservancy, and I advocate for software freedom as a public good. So I'll say in that, like, if in Conservancy's judgment that we're not talking about critical issues that affect people's lives and that are essential for us to have a better, situation with our technology, then I assume that we in Conservancy's board would decide not to work on those issues. So to me, I think where software touches all of these issues, I think they're critically important, and I think we need to think about them. And that's why, I've tried to work on things like contract patch and getting people to talk about their employment agreements and thinking creatively about all the different ways that we can. The main thing about what I try to do and we try to do is to think about, like, what pragmatic activities can we do to address the issue at hand? And that's been in sort of our role in our niche, and so we're kind of like project based, and I think that's true of some of our member projects too. And we have a very close relationship with like Outreachy, for example, because where we see inequity, that's a project that we're a little more involved in than even just our normal member project. So and have a real partnership there. So this is a very blathering non-answer actually, as I listen to myself talk. But I would say we have to be active here because otherwise, what are we doing? Oh, so who else wants to?
Yeah, hello. So following back on today, and you've been participating in a lot of things, just to ask a question about like the politics of open source that we've seen today, right? And first, I highly respect, I discover more and more about your background and what you've done over the last years, and I totally respect that. But let's say from a lot of the people who spoke, like there is a big, let's say, direct or indirect link to big corporation funding, right, at some point. And we can state that they've done great things also to contribute to open source. But my question, as you are leaders, thought leaders in this space, and for all the thought leaders in that space, say, what are the guarantees the community takes to be sure to always be independent in ethics with this? I think we can keep our ethics, we are funded with whatever funds the thing. But what are the guarantees the community has taken over time, and what are the current ones today, if I'm understood well?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I think that it's a really tough question. For me, in my experience, when I first got involved with free software, it was almost exclusively volunteers, and now there are a lot of people that are, that do open source as their day job, and I think that's great. And you bring up a question of what does that influence mean, for the movement, and I think that it's a tough question, but I actually think that stepping back, we're at a moment in our movement where we're being challenged by the definition of our movement at all. What is it that what does free software mean? What does open source mean? And you know, one of the things that we heard earlier today is that our original notions of this that we got written down are, you know, quite old, 20 years old. And so answering your question about ethics, I think we even have to, you know, think of what is the evolution of our movement and what does it mean? I think that can answer your question. For me, I'm really motivated by the idea of collaboration and not having to ask permission, and maybe some classic notions of software freedom. And I think that it's tricky to see how that's going to evolve with all the things that have put pressure on us, like network computing and such things. So it's a tough question, but I think that we even have a bigger question, which is how are we defining what we're doing, and how are we educating people that are new into caring about what it is that we care about?
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning politics, Mehdi. Karen often tells me to stop saying that fundamentally the work that at least I do, not so much as she does, is basically being a politician. But free software and open source has become a political process. It's the worst kind of political process in a lot of ways because as you mentioned, we have all these companies that have this influence. Nobody elected them. They don't represent the community, and nobody elected me either. We at Conservancy, we have a self-perpetuating board. The OSI deserves credit for being basically the only organization in our community that actually holds an election and goes to the people, you know? But let's put that aside for a moment. I think it's great that they run an election and they actually get votes and respect the votes of their constituency. And we need more of that kind of small R republic kind of representation. Debian is another great example. It's the only free software project that's a constitutional republic. And so we have this weird political structure which is just ripe for corruption because there's corporations floating around hiring people, and people go to work for companies even though they're technically working on a project. And we have not solved any of that political complication. And I work on it every day, and I really don't even know if I understand how it works and how to fix it and how to make it better. It's really tough. I don't know what to do about it, but I recognize this is what you're raising is a huge problem.
So first, thank you for this session because I think it's the most interesting session of the day. One point on my side as a European person, I'm a bit not finding everything I would like to find in this type of session because I like the European vision as well, in addition to a more US-centric vision of the law. So I would like, for example, the Google versus Oracle case. I would love to see what does the Supreme Court result means for us in Europe. What does it mean for us? What would be the consequences? Is there any impact for us as well? And for all the rest of the day, I would also like to have in the board with you some European lawyers that could bring an additional set of information around what you are bringing, which is already great. Don't take me wrong.
So a couple of points. Your question is very apropos. I think it would be really great to have an analysis of what Oracle v. Google would mean specifically to the European Union. It's a fabulous question. We have, throughout the history of the DevRoom, we've really tried hard to represent a diversity of views, and diversity not just of Europeans and people from all around the world, but also from women and underrepresented people. So, and you saw European lawyers up today. You heard Miriam's cross-examination. She's brilliant. That was great. And we've had, other...
like 6 or 7.
Yeah, so we had a variety. It could be better, and I take that point. And I do want to go further and acknowledge that one of the campaigns that I most admire in Europe is public code, public money, public code. I think that this is a great message, and this is something that can articulate what we care about to a broader audience. And I think that message, and talking to my fellow Europeans, has been well received. I think people in the general population get that message more readily than the equivalent Americans. So.
I love the cross-jurisdictional aspect of your question, and I think if we do this again, we should absolutely see, because we do a CFP, but we wind up not getting as many submissions or all along the things that we think should be addressed. So we'll work hard to encourage people to submit on topics that evaluate these cases in a cross-jurisdictional way. I really like that.
There's another question.
And yeah, I just want to say, as I often do when I travel outside the U.S., I apologize for my country and the policies that it exports around the world. I was born there, it wasn't my fault. Where's the mic? People in the stream are screaming, Kelly. Oh, I'm sure.
Okay.
Okay, well, we'll pass Philippe the microphone a little bit later for him to make his point. There's a question here.
It's not a question. I would like to answer what does Oracle v. Google mean in the European Union. So the European Copyright Directive on computer programs explicitly excludes interfaces from being copyrightable to foster interoperability. So at least from my view, there wouldn't be such a case in Europe. Google could just have taken the interface. And
Can you take the mic?
Yeah, just make sure you're on the mic speaking, please.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just, there is a case, the SAS case, in the ECJ, I think that is directly on point on what your comment.
It's interesting to imagine if the ECJ rules one way and the Supreme Court rules a different way, that's going to make our life even more complicated.
We have 3 minutes.
Okay, Philippe wanted to say something. Okay.
So, my question, following up on what you said about what could be new ways for the free software movement to not really reinvent itself, but find an identity that matters now. You mentioned just now public money, public code, but in general, starting from the freedoms or the open source definition, all the definitions of the free software movement have been very much focused on what could be appealing to developers. Do you think that we missed an opportunity to involve the users?
Yes. I agree with you. I agree with everything you're about to say. Yes.
No, I was going to say when and how and what could we do now. It's only questions, you cannot agree with them.
This is kind of a subject that's close to my heart, which is how can we give users standing in free software culture and hardware? And one of the challenges that we have, especially in considering open hardware licenses, is that the end user that receives a product doesn't have standing to insist on the source. And I think we need to, involve users. I like that.
This might be a good thing to discuss next year if we have a room.
Philippe, did you want to follow up?
It was covered, yep.
Okay.
It was discussed before.
One more question, or?
Again, great thanks for all this wonderful talk, and please applaud to the wonderful. And I personally looking forward to what you have in store for us for next year, 10th anniversary session, right?
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out. I know it's a long day. It's a hard building to get to, and we really appreciate your input.
Thank you for getting your shoes muddy.
Yeah. You can find at least my email address on the FOSDEM mailing list where we let out the CFP, and I'd love to get your feedback if you didn't have a chance to get your question or thought in. And before you leave today, if you could, we could ask you a favor to look down and pick up any trash that you find and deposit it in the trash bins that are on either side of the room and help us clean up. That would be great.
I just want to point out that last year was our 1-0 anniversary in Octal anyway, so it's already happened.
And wait, one last applause for Tom Marble, the amazing Tom Marble.